notes just for the purposes of general discussion notes, not anything for content related to the report. So I don't know that I didn't put together a specific agenda really. I know last week we were all given an assignment to read the documentation. We talked about the strategic considerations that Entry Point reviewed with us, and we were supposed to go back and come back with questions, comments, kind of review and things need attention. I know that several members sent comments about about what they were reading or some of their concerns and shared that. I did share that with with the Entry Point, so maybe we could use that as a starting point for discussion. But I don't know, Jeff or Devin, whoever's going to kind of lead the conversation today, that's kind of where I am. So I don't know where you want to start today.
Yep. My camera for some reason is not turning on, so I'm going to try a different camera and see if that works. But so a few things. Can we start? So we want to talk about this grant, the Community Compact Grant.
Good thing to start with, yes.
So let's start that, if you don't mind, Sean, and then we can go into the other issues.
Yeah, so Keith, you want to tell the group about that? That was a really amazing piece of work you did there.
Yeah, so I think David and I, we had heard about the grant, and it was kind of a last minute thing, but we were able to write something up, and I was able to pull some information together from some prior work. And it was basically from the state. It was a community grant there related to fiber optics and so forth. So basically, we put together a proposal that said that we were going to extend some of the sub rings, I think 2 of the 6 sub rings, and also to put cameras at the town hall and the annex in obviously in public locations, either inside or outside of the building. So the combination of having the cameras and streaming that back to a central location over the fiber, seems like they approved that. They liked that combination of what we were doing, and they approved that for, I think it was 240,000, something to that effect. So it's one more piece to the puzzle.
Yeah.
Thank you for the work you did on that. I know we had a very small match. I don't know what it was. We had a small match that the select board agreed to use ARPA money for the matching.
Yeah.
But Jeff, did you want to? So good job to all of you who put together.
No,
David. David wanted to talk. Go ahead, David.
David, we can't hear you.
We can't hear you, David. No, and you're not on mute. Just got a bad microphone or something. Yeah, we can't hear you, David.
Maybe there's volumes down.
Well, but his volume, does that affect the microphone?
He could silence it, so he could turn it off. But
David, you got something silenced here.
How now?
There we go.
Yeah.
There
Okay.
you go.
Well, I was trying to operate through my hearing aids, and they don't pick up the voice very well. Anyway, what I wanted to add is we appreciated it was the Entry Point folks that alerted us to the availability of that grant. And with 2 days to go, Keith and I put the thing together. Keith did 90% of the work on it. And the maximum amount that you could request was 250,000. And so we requested 241. I thought that was a little brazen. And I looked at past grants that they've given, and I don't see anything over the past 5 years that got even close to 100,000. So I was kind of dubious that they would come through, but they liked what we asked for apparently and came up with the whole amount. So I think it was a wonderful result, and it just shows that there is money out there, and that if we can get our act together, I think we can get a lot more money that won't depend on town budget financing and won't put the burden on homeowners nearly so much as some of the people have anticipated. So I think it's a very encouraging result, and I think we can count on further support from the state.
It just occurred to me that I think we are in a public meeting talking about it, but I think we were not supposed to be talking about it yet. I think the agency is supposed to be announcing it. We just let the cat out of the bag
Sorry about that.
for all the many people who are going to be watching this meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, so we were a little bit skeptical because we let you know late and you only had 2 days to pull that together. So kudos
Right.
to David and Keith. It does point to, so the other reality is that there's money out there. And so Josh Eichen is in pretty regular contact with us and at MBI. He set up a meeting last week specifically to say, this was implied, not explicit, but basically to say there's 50 million that probably will become available around July 1st. That is non-infrastructure money. The infrastructure money is coming after. But his job is to get that 50 million out. And he's got some level of concern that there aren't going to be good projects to apply that $50 million to. So he was basically asking us to help our clients get organized around applying for that, submitting applications for that.
I've got a great suggestion for that, because where I particularly live, this is Richard Zymek. I live at the senior housing facility. I attended a board meeting yesterday, and what the board there feels is they're not part of Westport, but they're also not part of the state. I don't have cable that works in the complex where I live, Greenwood Terrace Apartments. The problem is the cable is bad. The Spectrum has come out. They've tested their lines that run to the buildings, and the problems lie within the buildings. And they're not going to go in and rewire the buildings. So I'm left basically with it. I'm left with an antenna. I get 8 channels of TV, and I have to drive across the street to Nick's Pizza to get on Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
If
So you're suggesting looking for opportunities for funding, for grants to support getting that hooked up faster, right?
Yeah,
well, I get
Richard,
the part.
You keep presenting the concerns of your particular locale. I wish you'd broaden your perspective to the town. We're trying to do something
I
for
am.
the town now.
I am. In fact, that's why I'm speaking of this, because what ends up happening over the course of these decades, and I emphasize decades, is that this particular facility and with seniors and disabled veterans, handicapped folks, were forgotten, and we're lying beyond anybody who wants to look at the fact that we sit between a state or a town organization.
So Richard, I've noted your suggestion that we look for grants related to extending internet to the affordable housing units. I think that's a good cause to be looking at. But let's go back to Jeff. Jeff, you were talking about the relationship you have with the funding agencies and keeping us in the loop to make sure we're aware of future possibilities for things like that. And I do think affordable housing is a good target for where to spend some of that money.
Yeah. So you really have, so Richard, thanks for bringing that up. And you really are actually backing into something accidentally. So this is not an infrastructure allotment of money, this 50 million. And so you think about how we're going to spend 50 million on non-infrastructure projects. And this is an equity pot of money. So one of the things that he did talk about, Josh Eichen, is public housing and getting reliable Wi-Fi to public housing. And that may first blush, and he didn't say this explicitly, so there was kind of an implied suggestion here. At least we inferred that there was a public suggestion. If you're going to build out or submit a proposal to get to public housing, that's the explicit application. But if it were me, I would make the case for building infrastructure to that, which is a legitimate use according to him. But what the incumbents have been doing for years with E-rate is they'll get an E-rate application to go to a school or a library, and instead of putting in 12 count fiber, they'll put in 288 count fiber. So they'll get the public money, and then they'll use it to build basically a backbone of infrastructure. And, you know, they'll do 144 count or 288 count. They'll put in a lot of infrastructure. And so the state's not saying do that, but if you're successful in the grant, we should look at leveraging that opportunity, is what I'm saying. And so I think going after what Richard is suggesting, actually, so it's explicitly called out as a target for this pot of money. And so we need to evaluate that. We need to look at what are your public housing facilities in Westport. I think a fundamental question behind all of this is what came out in the emails, which is a concern as should the town be in this space? And I know we don't know the answer to that. We're going to work through the process, but I think it's a fundamental question that you all need to answer through this process before you get too deep in the water. Because you're probably not going to want to manage these systems if you're not going to get into the water fully. So I think that's not something to decide tonight, but I think between now and the end of June, I think it's something to decide, and we need to arm you with the data so that you can decide that.
Could I ask one question?
Yep.
This is mainly of Keith, I guess. Isn't one of the loops that is going to be funded by this new grant, doesn't that cover that Route 6 corridor area?
That was one of the loops, yes, for the Route 6 corridor.
So that we are presumably getting funding to extend that loop down Route 6, and this housing complex that he's talking about is right along that loop, so that it may be something to try to link this into that. That's all.
Well, if I may interrupt, David, just briefly, you know, what we have at that Cumberland Farms on State Road Route 6 is a substation right across from CBS. That's from, at least from my understand, has already been done. I had the chance to talk to some Verizon folks again last week who are running the fiber optic for Verizon, and they're basically planning no off ramps. I like the term of off ramps because I like to consider what we're looking at is creating a highway, whether it be Route 6 or 177, hopefully all of them, and possibly something that would run down 88. What we're doing is we're creating or proposing running a superstructure, the superhighway, with no exits.
So let's go back.
So
So right now we don't have a plan for the next phase, right? So right now we're only hooking up the town facilities. It looks like with this grant, we have an opportunity to kind of bolt on what it's part of what we're going to consider for what's the next piece of work should we do? Because we really do need to talk about, do we keep going or do we stop? Or do we keep extending in small pieces, and what's the plan? So I think that this new grant is going to give us some opportunities to look at those next phases. But what I want to do is step back instead of talking about specific phases and kind of step back to some of the strategic stuff that we started working on. So,
well, it's, you're exactly right on the money. and I guess that's all I'm trying to, to bring forward for the town purpose. That was something that you asked earlier, is something that benefits the town, not the particular place where I live. Running that fiber optic, I think it's essential for us going forward, and creating that infrastructure will ultimately be able to invite business in and any number of things. We would just be really just a sidetrack to it.
Thank you. So I want to move on though. So thank you. I think your comments are really good. But let's move on. So Jeff, where did you want to go next with the conversation here?
All right. So anyway, so just June 30's out there. Entry Point wants to help the committee in the next month kind of get financial data in your hands so that you can look at the information and then decide how far into the water we going. And that includes making sure that we're framing the strategic questions adequately for you so that you can think about that while you look at the financial stuff. So we've got a little bit of work to do here today just to kind of tie that up, the strategic stuff. This next $50 million. So one other thing, if you decide to keep going, another legitimate use is to hire staff for equity purposes. That's the stated purpose. So if you're going to do stuff, whether it's, public housing is a good target, then you can allowed use is to hire staff, which can be beneficial for the project as a whole. So that's
actually huge. One of the problems that we're having with all of this work going on, particularly the water sewer, but this I think would qualify, is that we're having a hard time staffing it. There's special projects that it's kind of one time, but most grants don't let you do that. And we don't really have a lot of town resources.
Yeah.
The select board is considering on Monday the creation of an infrastructure advisory committee. I think would be sort of like this committee is doing. And David probably knows more about it because it's probably David that proposed it, but it's kind of like this committee, but for like the water sewer infrastructure stuff on Route 6.
That's such a great idea.
Yeah, it is. It's a good idea. And you still have struggle staffing it, right? You're staffing with volunteers. So if some of this grant money, I know for the Route 6 project, we can use some of that grant money for project management types. But if we can get some help with this, that's huge, actually.
Yeah. So just know, the application, we're going to have to tie it to this is an equity pot of money. So there would have to be equity, which means addressing things like Richard's bringing up.
What does that mean, equity?
So you're talking about
disadvantage, David. People that are at a disadvantage economically.
Oh, okay.
Like social equity.
Can I please just interject one other point? There is, when I hear comments regarding public housing projects, I would like everybody to know there's only one in the town of Westport. That's Greenwood Terrace Apartments. Things have been done in other places, but they are not senior handicapped veterans housing. We only have one. That's what the Westport Housing Authority is involved with, is only that one location.
But Richard, I think you would agree that equity in housing would also include other affordable housing that we have in town. And we need to look at all of it, right? So I want to move on from that conversation.
Okay. All right. So one of the items on the agenda was the timeline from our last meeting. And because this money is coming out at the end of June, I think it's our responsibility to put you in a position by the end of June to decide, are we going forward with this, or is this not a right fit for Westport at this point in time? So that's our goal between now and the end of June, is to layer in the missing pieces and do Q&A, help answer questions, give you the financial data, so that as a group, it's an important time because there's this pot of money. The big pots of money are down the road. the BEAD funding that will come from the federal government. But Massachusetts is going to get probably at least $500 million, maybe up to $1 billion for broadband. And another thing that the state said to us is that the 10 projects Entry Point is working on in Massachusetts are a large, if not a majority, of the things that are happening in Massachusetts, meaning cities and towns that are in motion. It's going to be hard to apply for money if you're not in motion. And so there is some concern they're going to get a lot of money and there's not enough boots on the ground looking for or tying good projects to the money that will be available. So anyway, timeline wise, that's our goal, is that by the end of June, we're going to give you all the data, put a plan in front of you, so that you can then make timely decisions. Is this right for Westport or not right at this point in time? So we good there?
At the end of June
Yes,
sounds good.
yes, very much.
Jeff, while you're talking about conversations with MBI and Josh, you want to share with them the consortium idea?
Yeah, so they recommended that we start with our clients. So this wouldn't be an Entry Point thing. It's just that the clients we're working with are active. So Entry Point would sort of fade into the background, but they think there should be a municipal broadband infrastructure consortium in the state, so that the cities and towns that are working in this space are speaking with one voice to the state and influencing policy, but also influencing legislation and how the money gets passed out and distributed. So we've started that process. I think in the next 30 days, it'll start to take shape. We're going to kind of help it take shape, but it's not, it's not like a marketing wing for Entry Point. We're going to fade away. But we think it is a good idea for the cities to be talking to the state and Mass Tech and other groups about the interests of municipalities in this space. So that's another thing that's happening. And then one last thing that's come up, and then we'll get into the strategy stuff. New Bedford is a little unique in that their legal counsel has suggested to them that they go forward not with a municipal light plant, but with an enterprise fund. And they're the only ones we know of going down that road. So we've dug into it a little bit. I'll send you a couple of links. The city of Chelsea also, they brought it up. They said, why can't we just do this as an enterprise fund? Why do we have to set up this municipal light plant thing? And I told them that New Bedford was doing that. And since that, dug into it more. So there's a couple of links out there in terms of state level conversations about suggesting that it can be done as an enterprise fund as opposed to a municipal light plant. Chelsea and New Bedford want to go down that road because they feel like they're not setting up another board that's under the select board, that it's just directly in an enterprise fund, it's directly under the select board. And they feel like it's a more efficient mechanism for them. We're not attorneys, so we can't really advise you there, but we'll give you the information we've got on it. And you can look at it and talk to your legal counsel and decide if you want to explore it further in terms of a structure. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions on any of that? We good?
No, I don't believe so.
All right. So the strategy stuff we're going to give you today is kind of looking down the road and at what's coming. And it's not meant to be sort of the canon on this. It's our opinion. So when you look down the road, nobody has a perfect view, right? Anything in the future, we don't see super clearly. But strategy implies that you're looking down the road. Ultimately, our feeling is Westport's a somewhat affluent community, or at least middle class, upper middle class community. There are people in your community that would be considered on the digital divide, poor access, poor affordability. But the community as a whole is probably in a strong position financially, or relatively strong position. So that's probably not the big driver for Westport, and that kind of came out in the email comments. I think ultimately this is about local control of this infrastructure. It's a big project, right? I mean, it's a big deal. It's not trivial to stand up a network like this. To me, the ultimate reason why you would do this has to do with controlling your future, as opposed to, we can tell you you're going to be able to do this less expensive than the average national cost. That, I think we're going to be able to show that. You're going to be able to do it less expensive. It's not going to be a lot less. So it's not going to be, we can save $10 a month on our bill, so we should do this big project. You would get fiber, and you would get a much higher level of speed. So we think you can get, I think in Westport, you're going to be between $55 and $60 for a symmetrical gig. Whether that's motivating to the group to take on a project of this size, I don't know. Ultimately, I think it's about control of your future in this particular asset class of this infrastructure class. So I'm going to share with you sort of our view on where things are bending, and just take it with a grain of salt. This is our view, and you're all smart people, and you're going to have a view on where things are going as well. So this does get a little more technical. At the end of our meeting last time, there was some conversation about, maybe we should leave this to the experts in the group. And, however you talk internally, we're totally good with. All right.
Do you want to just remind the committee, though, that we want to hear from everybody? I think it was really good, the statements that came across from different people with their thoughts.
Yes.
But we are subject to open meeting law. So I didn't see a lot of conversation in those strings, but it's really important that if we share background information like that we're not talking about it in the email, then we need to make sure we're talking about it here.
Yeah, good point. Okay.
But I know Paul and Renee and Keith all had some very good thoughts. So I'm hoping you will pipe up and disagree with Jeff or ask Jeff questions here.
Yeah, I mean, my email was meant to provoke thought. I mean,
Yeah.
I think the project's a good project. I want to go into it like I do everything at work when we do a project for a customer, with my eyes wide open and have a budget in mind. So if we're going to go into this project and say, well, it's going to cost just $30 million, the subscribers are going to be able to support 80% of the potential subscribers, 80% of the cost. We need to be honest about, the numbers and who's actually going to sign up. And we need to probably in my opinion, dig a little deeper into the survey, the original survey we did. I think everybody would want to switch over to Gig Ethernet, given the chance, assuming that, it came in cheap, and then you get all the lateral runs from the street. I mean, there's a lot of variables that come in, and we run into this stuff every day. And sometimes it just gets, the details get painful. And, but the last thing you want to do, and I'm sure the guys from Metroport can say, is put a budget together for $20 million and then have it cost $26 million and go to the town and say, oh, by the way, we didn't do a great job of estimating it. So that was my idea with my email, was to provoke thought into not just the good part of this, but to look at the potential pitfalls of doing this. Not pitfalls from a network side, but pitfalls from a potential financial side. And that's all. Because
and your points in your email, in my opinion, were excellent.
Yeah, and I think it's really, I mean, that's the value of a committee, when people speak up and ask the hard questions, right? I mean, if on a committee nobody's disagreeing or asking a question that should be asked, then you're not really functioning as a committee. So, we're 100% supportive of that kind of dialogue. I think John is right. We've got to do it in a way that we don't have a problem in terms of process. But
And just one other interjection. It ultimately the upgrade that this project does has to happen, whether it's during the discussions that we're having now or in the future. It is going to happen.
yes,
So let us use the resources that may be available federally, statewide, locally, whatever. Let us tap into this right now.
So I'm trying to run this meeting a little less formally than some meetings, but I want to make sure that we stay on track. So let's let Jeff have the floor and take it for a little bit, and then he can stop for questions when he's ready.
yeah, okay.
Okay, I'm sorry, guys.
That's okay.
All right, so I'm going to try and keep it concise, get the ideas out there. We're going to send you a deck by Monday that has all this information in it, so you can kind of go back at it, look at it, critique it, write, scribble questions, whatever. We're also going to send you a white paper that we wrote, so it's our view of the world, on what I'm going to cover right now. It is more technical, and it's probably 3 pages. So those of you that are technical will be in a better position than others to evaluate it. So we're going to send you the deck and this white paper, and then I think it'll help. Those 2 things will help you when we come back and get you to answer the strategic questions. So,
Good.
all right. So evolution of the internet. So we've got hardware and software here, hardware on the top, software on the bottom. And, computers emerged, and then we got this thing, the World Wide Web. And the reality in the US is that the telephone company and the cable company had existing infrastructure. Obviously, telephone was delivering voice services, cable was delivering television, cable TV. And if we could go back and, see the future, would we have built 2 competing infrastructures? I think that's clearly a no. The only reason we have 2 competing infrastructures is that they existed. And both the phone company and the cable company figured out how to run the internet across their infrastructure. But we ended up with this model where you compete at the infrastructure layer. We've talked about this, as opposed to competing at the service layer as this rolled out. So the relevance of that, so does that make sense? Do you have questions about that? That we had?
Makes perfect sense.
Okay. All right. So we're end up competing at the infrastructure layer, and whoever controls the infrastructure has control. So cable TV has control over their infrastructure, and telephone has control of theirs. And we're going forward with that model where that's the way people compete. They build new infrastructure. So if you have fiber optics, you don't need more than one. So we think you are going to end up with a fiber optic monopoly, which I said last week. So part of the question for you is, do you want that? How important is it to you that it's public infrastructure versus private infrastructure? And that's a question that you'll have to debate internally. Does that matter? Are you comfortable knowing that you're probably going to go forward with one fiber optic provider? How important it is to have local control over that infrastructure versus, letting the private company do their thing? So that's just a question that you're going to have to answer as a committee. So as we look at the evolution here, we went from the World Wide Web, where we were basically moving data, small amounts of data, up till 2000. Then we started to get social networks, and what was the web really transformed with social networks and doing everything moving to cloud. That started to happen in that time period. And then cell phones came in where everybody has a cell phone. So the part of the question here is what's next? So, are we just going to have the current state going into the future? I think we all know it's going to change, it's going to morph in some way. And it's always hard to know what's next. So the stuff I want to go through today is to try and point you in a couple of directions to think about as we think about what is next and what kind of network do we need as we go into the future. So these first few
By the way, I think it's interesting to point out, go back to the last slide, if you will. The term immersive and the mesh, those are not entry point terms.
No.
Those are terms that some very, very smart people that do this for a living, that's what they're telling us. And they're pretty aligned on this, surprisingly, right? For most of the experts are somewhat aligned on, where this is likely to head. So we just want to share that these are not, entry point theories. This is based upon a lot of research we've done with kind of the experts out there. So anyway, good.
Yeah. I mean, you look at what Facebook's doing. So Facebook changed their name to Meta for Metaverse. So that's another name you could easily use, the Metaverse. But the other big companies, so Google is playing in this space, Apple's playing in this space, Facebook changed their name of their company to align with what's coming or what they think is coming. But they are pointing to what's next. And so the important question for this committee, to the degree we can know what's next or see what's next, what kind of network do we need or want there? The other thing I'd throw out there is when I travel internationally, and I think you've all had this experience, take Guatemala City, for example. It takes like 4 hours most of the time to get across Guatemala City. And, if they had good infrastructure, it would maybe take 60 minutes. But fundamentally, the problems there are, there's probably policy problems too, but infrastructure is a fundamental part of that problem. And
I like your analogy.
Yeah, people could poke holes in that analogy, but I think infrastructure is a key enabler for economic development. I think infrastructure comes before economic development. And
totally agree.
So, I think you do need to be thinking in those terms, both in terms of what's next, and it's important to think about solving today's problems and is the network sufficient today? But we also need to be thinking about what about tomorrow? Is it, are we going to be in a Guatemala City kind of situation with our infrastructure 5 years from now, 10 years from now? So, all right. So the next 3 slides come from, are we together?
I can't see anything. I'm sitting in front of a pizza restaurant.
I just got it. I think it's probably another one. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear.
Okay. I got a prompt come up. So,
Yeah.
So this comes from a workshop that happened in 2016 that the National Science Foundation put on. And it was mostly academic. There were a couple of cities invited. But it really was, so it was called, it was What is Next for the Internet? It was organized around that. And part of the white paper we're going to send you, we're probably pulling 8 paragraphs from the workshop paper that came out of that. But the whole thing was organized around where's this all going? Where's infrastructure going? And where's networking going? So this point, software-defined infrastructure is the starting point of a very deep revolution that will reshape the global computing infrastructure. Today's internet will run in just one slice across the infrastructure, with many other novel services populating other slices. So, and I think it is important to also note that the internet was largely funded, the work for the internet, the academic work was largely funded out of the National Science Foundation. So this is kind of their space. They've been in it from the beginning and funding this kind of research from the beginning. So it's not like they're coming at this from a orthogonally. So next, today's relatively static cyber infrastructures implemented via hardware with predetermined control systems will morph into fluid planetary scale software systems, highly interconnected, deeply programmable, and virtualized. Okay, so that's a bunch of technical stuff. What this is really saying is that hardware defined networks, which we have today, are going to become software defined. So hardware is expensive to change. Software, you write new software. So software is a lot faster and a lot less expensive. And hardware is expensive to change and it's slower because of the costs associated with it. So my summary of this, the point they're making here is today's hardware defined networks are going to change to software networks. And today we have vertically integrated systems, which means they're kind of top down, they're siloed, somewhat rigid. They're going to change, and because they're going to be software, they're going to be a lot more flexible and adaptive to the future. So that's the point of that slide. And then this is the last one on this, this workshop information. Most forms of infrastructure going forward will be software defined. Software defined infrastructure cracks open the calcified network core stack, opening it to innovation, enhanced agility, perhaps incorporating machine learning, and an expanded diversity of networking approaches. So we'll send the white paper, and the white paper is really focused on this kind of detail. I'm not going to go through every line here, but what we're comparing is vertically integrated networks to what we think of as distributed networks. We're going to send you the deck so you can look at it and compare. But it's the point I already made, which is that the current networks are kind of monolithic, slow to evolve. And we think we're going to go to dynamic distributed networks. But the financial interests today are interested in the status quo. So as we get to, I think it's key, publicly owned infrastructure is going to be much more dynamic than privately owned infrastructure that has a specific business model tied to it. So public infrastructure that's adaptive to different business models, that really is infrastructure as a service. So the infrastructure is available as long as you play by the rules, it's available to use, is going to morph and adapt much more readily than these vertically integrated systems that have a specific business model associated with them. Does that make sense, or am I talking Greek here?
You're right on the money, in my opinion.
Yeah, we're with you.
Okay. All right. So Kevin Kelly, I think I've probably already quoted Kevin Kelly to you. His book, New Rules for a New Economy, I think it's still very relevant and it's free. It's on his website. It's an ebook. It was written in '98, so you got to take part of it with a grain of salt. But he says, the principles governing the world of the soft, the world of intangibles, of media, of software and services, will soon command the world of the hard, the world of reality, of atoms, of objects, of steel, oil, iron, lumber. They will all obey the laws of the software economy. So this is still unfolding. Even though we've seen a lot of progress since '98, this is still taking root. And I think there's still a lot of transformation to come. And our belief is that the networks that can orient towards software control are going to open up a bunch of possibilities that hardware networks can't do. So let me show you one other thing here. I'm going to go into video mode. So today, so this is tied to Idaho, project in Idaho. I think you all know that the internet system works like our mail system. So when we send, like if you send an email to the person across the street, it doesn't just go directly to them. Like the post office, it would go down to the post office and then get addressed or routed back to your neighbor, even though they live across the street. Internet, same way, it's going to go down to an internet exchange point and then get routed back to the person, even though they may be 50 feet away from you or 100 feet away from you. So that's the way the internet works. So this little illustration is just showing that. So when you send a packet or an email, it goes, in this case, going from Idaho to Portland or Seattle or Salt Lake, and then back, even though it's 3 blocks away. So that's the way the internet works. With these new software-defined networks that are emerging, it's more of a data center architecture. And you're going to have both capabilities. You're going to have the ability to message directly. You'll be able to route directly to people across a local network, and use the traditional internet across the same infrastructure. So you'll have one fiber. If you go this direction, you would have one fiber at your home. And with that fiber, you would be able to decide whether you're going to communicate locally or across the traditional internet. And you're probably asking, why does that matter? So it matters in one sense from a public safety point of view. So nobody's got this today, so nobody expects it. But if you do get cut off at the middle mile somehow, some way, people would still be able to communicate locally. So that's one thing, is that you've got this local ability. I think the real reason it will matter is for privacy and security, is that people are going to be able to dynamically use applications that are not across the public internet. And I think telemedicine is going to go this way. Eventually, there's going to be a network effects thing, which means if you get enough scale, I think we're going to see financial transactions go, this is our view, financial transactions go into private networks as opposed to across the global internet. I think the grid is going to get attached. So you're going to see anything that should not be out in the public internet is going to go in layer 2 networks or private networks. And people are going to be able to determine, either the application provider or the subscriber is going to be able to determine whether they want to communicate layer 3 across the public internet, layer 2 in a private network. So does that make sense, that distinction? Somewhat?
Could
It's
I ask a question?
Yes, David.
In terms of local security, if you have this local network that can be used, that means you aren't still dependent on the extensive network. If something breaks down out there, you could still communicate between the police station and the high school. Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, I think that's very important.
Let me give you one other illustration that I think is also very important. And I don't think this is directly applicable to Westport, but I'll let you guys decide that. So during the pandemic, the surveys estimate that in cities like Detroit and Baltimore, nearly 34% of their students did not attend any school for a year and a half. So they lost 2 years of education in their elementary training because they either did not have connectivity at home to be able to access the school over the top of the internet, or they didn't have good enough connectivity, one of the two, right? The deployments that they're doing and that they're planning right now are kind of a reverse of this. They're going to depend on these private networks to give their low-income students access to the internet by giving them a direct connect to the school and library systems and then using the school and library's internet accounts and connectivity to do their homework, to do their research and all that good stuff. But attending classes will be a direct connect to the school from the home, as opposed to, again, going out to the broader internet and then having to come back in to those schools. So that's just another illustration of how these technologies are being applied out there, and how, you know, we're kind of shifting to this soft versus the hard idea.
All right. So Scott Shanker teaches at Berkeley, one of the founders of modern day software defined networking. So some people will argue it goes back to the 50s. That's probably true. Scott Shanker and Martin Casado developed this thing called the Open Flow Protocol, and which is modern day software defined networking. So his summary of this is everything interesting will happen in software at the edge. So his view is that networks just need to be dumb. They just need to carry packets. And so there needs to be software at the edge of the network, which is where the subscriber is. And it's there that important things will happen. And so it really is pointing toward this network as a service, infrastructure as a service model, and then allow application developers, various kinds of service providers, to innovate and deliver important services at the edge. So Kurt Vonnegut, out on the edge, you see all kinds of things you can't see from the center. The importance of this is right now we do have a vertically integrated system, and we think that's going to get broken down over the next 10 years. We think we're going to go to a distributed network. And we're at the early stages of that. So one last thing here, you may or may not be aware of this, but we're transitioning from IPv4 to IPv6, which is the addressing. This is the way, just think of the envelopes. When you send mail, how does the addressing happen? And so IPv4 is what we got when the internet came out. With IPv4, there were 4 billion total addresses. I should say addresses. That seemed like a lot at the time, but it turns out it's not enough. And so we've been doing some technical things to get around the fact that 4 billion out to not be enough address space. A big part of the reason we're going to IPv6 is to solve that problem. So to give you some perspective, Entry Point is not an ISP, or we're not going to become an ISP. But last year, Entry Point was given a /36 block of IPv6 addresses. So Entry Point, this is for our clients. That means Entry Point was given 18 quintillion IPv6 addresses. I think our math was that we could give each of our clients 1 trillion addresses, and we would need 200,000 clients to exhaust our address space. And so you think, why would Entry Point be given address space if Entry Point's not an ISP? You know, so our view is that everything's going to get an IP address. So I've got, just to kind of finish this out and to get you thinking about this, this is actually from a blog. So this is, you know, some guy's opinion out there. IT Dojo's what he calls himself. In the world I see, my toaster will have an IPv6 address. So will my alarm clock, my washer, my dryer, my dishwasher, my oven, my microwave. So essentially what he's saying is anything I want to communicate with is going to have its own IP address. He goes on and says, my car keys will never be lost again in the house. Neither will my TV remote control, nor my cell phone, etc. So he's just making the point that as we go to IPv6, I think it's fairly well understood that we're going to, anything we want to communicate with, we're going to give an IP address to. And there's a few things that are significant we don't have enough time to really dive into, but let me just close this out by saying today's ISPs, we think our view is today's ISPs control the address space, IPv4. That's part of their value proposition. They control the infrastructure, and oftentimes they control the middle mile to get back to the internet exchange point. Now, they obviously provide customer service and some other value proposition, but those three things are key: address space, infrastructure, middle mile. If they are going to lose control of the address space, because Entry Point has way more address space. We're not an ISP, and we have way more address space than the total internet right now. So they're going to lose control of the address space. If cities and towns build out the infrastructure, they're going to lose control of that. And in some places like California, they're losing control over the middle mile because the state's building an open access middle mile. So the point is that this whole system is starting to change. And as it does, we don't know where it's going to end. We have some ideas about where it's going. Like, we think it's going to software-defined networking, and we think everything we want to communicate with is going to have an IP address. We think the network needs to be able to support those changes, and we think cities and towns that build public infrastructure that's open are going to be in a better position to sort of enable that change. So anyway, we'll send you this information. We'll discuss it next time. We'll kind of get into the strategy stuff. Sorry for throwing a bunch of technical stuff at you, but I think it's, this future, where's everything going, is an important part of your decision making as you think about, does the town want to go deeper into this water?
Thank you for that. So I think that's some good things to think about where it's going in public versus private. I think that's important. When you look at the is that primarily what you wanted to talk about
that's
today,
it.
or did you have other topics?
Yep. Thanks,
Okay.
Sean.
So when you think about, if you think about how we're going to frame our discussion to get to, 6 weeks from now, you're talking about having the final report, right? If you think about the next few meetings that we're going to have, so this was really, for me, very helpful background for why you want fiber, like bigger pipes out there, and why you need to think about it differently, that vertically integrated market versus open and public. I think that's a very interesting concept. So so that was helpful. So are you thinking that the next meetings are also kind of background like this, or are you going to talk more about how you're how do you see the next few meetings?
Yeah, we'll take as an action item to give you a week by week agenda by next week, but it really is starting to do some decision making. So we'll probably start with Q&A next week on all this strategy stuff we've given you. So we're going to give you some content by Monday for you to review, and then Q&A next week.
We're meeting every 2 weeks. Just remember that.
Oh, that's right. Oh yeah. So we don't have a lot of meetings.
Yeah.
But in our next meeting, we do have to make some decisions, or at least guide you in the decision-making process so that you can make decisions about the key strategy. So the key strategy questions to us are: maintain the status quo and try and work with that, versus publicly owned infrastructure. That's a key thing. Closed access versus open access. That's the business model. The big one, which came out in the emails, is how are we going to pay for this? So what are the options available to us in terms of what tools, in terms of financing this thing? And that's probably the biggest. So I think in our next meeting, we want to do as much as we can to decide what strategy you want to recommend to the town. We don't have a lot of sessions to get to the end of June. We may have to try and do toward the end some weekly meetings, but we've got to also look at next steps. So if the town wants to go forward, what does that look like? Meaning, what's involved? you've clearly stated the town doesn't have the personnel resources. So I think the logical outcome there would be to recommend that a company like Comtract, who I think you're using for your city network, that you use an outsourced provider to maintain and operate the network. So to us, the key thing is ownership. Who owns it? Because then you're setting policy and deciding how things work. If you hire a third party to do it, that's a 3-year contract or a 5-year contract that you can switch if you need to.
If I look at it, you know, based on like some of the stuff that Paul pointed out, right? Like, how much money do you have to spend before it finally gets to someone's home, and how much does that person have to pay out of pocket to get it to their home, and what's their likely fee going to be, right? So, like, it all sounds great. If somebody said, "Hey, tomorrow you can have, you know, fiber to your house," it'd be like great, but how much did the town have to make an investment in that? How much do I personally have to invest in that? Like, I mean, I know you said the financials are pretty significant, and so it's, you know, the first part of the project was connecting the town infrastructure. So that's just like any company would have to do. If a company had multiple locations, right, you'd have to string that all together. If you had, you know, a campus. But going beyond that, like, how much money do you invest and what value is there in the next investment, right?
Yep.
If money is going to be available, even this grant we just got, is there valuable use for that? Does that get you anywhere?
So part of the benefit of the town sponsoring this is the town's a logical neutral host. But the town can also access municipal finance, which means longer term financing. So if the private sector did it, they're going to finance it probably in a 5 to 10 year window, where municipal is probably going to be 20 to 30 year. So the longer financing term is going to enable a lower monthly cost. So we would not expect that anybody would pay out of pocket up front. It would all be rolled into a long-term financing vehicle probably in a 20 to 30 year window. I think
No, Richard, let him talk. No, Richard, let Jeff have the floor.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So we would expect that kind of financing vehicle. The big question for the town would be, would it be a general obligation of the town, or would it be a revenue bond? So would the financing be tied to the revenues of the network, or would it be a general obligation? What we're working through with Fairhaven right now, they're introducing special legislation because a betterment in Massachusetts applies to everybody. The structure of a betterment is, it touches everybody. So if you do a betterment, that means everybody's on the hook. And you could take it just to the curb of everybody's house and not require them to hook up. But even at that level, the betterment structure is not a voluntary opt-in structure. It applies universally. So Fairhaven is applying for special legislation to allow them to do an opt-in betterment, which means just those who want to sign up would sign up for the betterment, and those who don't would not have to pay for it. So then the key question for the city becomes the one that Paul brought up, which is, you got to go out, you got to know your take rate. I mean, it's not if we build it, they will come. We would have to go out and do the groundwork to really have a clear understanding of whether people would sign up for this thing. So that would be, you know, there's some costs to go and figure that out. You got to go talk to people. But to me, that's probably your key thing in front of you, is getting really good data on what percentage of the town would sign up for this thing. I think we're going to be able to model it. I think you will be able to, if you got a 50% take rate, so half of the properties in the town, I think you're going to be around $60 even with your long driveways. I could be off a few dollars either direction, but I think you're going to be around $60. But we would need to go, I think for any of you to get comfortable with this, and for the select board, we would need to go out and really talk to people and know what's the reality out there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as familiar with the Fairhaven geography, but I think we have significant rural stretches here, right? We don't have, we do have areas where there's density, but we have some that there just isn't. Right?
Yeah.
And Richard, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. I did have the opportunity to speak with a good friend who's involved in part of this. So what I'm being told, at least by him, he's saying it's about $80 at least per foot to run the cable. Part two of what I want to interject is that we can run the cable to the building, but every building, every home, every business, every apartment structure, it wouldn't matter. They are going to be required to pay to rewire their own structures. So these are decisions that we need to think about.
So that's part of the total cost of installation, right? How do I get it to my house working?
Yeah. So
So Jeff, is part of
It's
what
totally
you're
about it. Yeah.
yeah. So Jeff, part of what you're doing going to be recommending how we understand this take rate, or are you going to suggest some way we can have a better understanding of the take rate by the end of June?
So if we get to the end of this and this committee, you're not going to recommend to go to construction. You're going to recommend to do the next steps, right? The first next step would be you can do feasibility design for $1 per premise. So $1 per premise. So how many households do you have in Westport? Do you know?
I don't know. Maybe 10,000.
5,000, 5,000, 4,800.
Okay.
That's it, David. Really, with 16,000 people?
Yeah.
Probably about right.
Right.
That's about right.
You're good.
He's long-term planning board member. He knows.
Yeah. So that's that. I divide by 3. So, so we would do a feasibility design. We would you may do an RFP for it, but we'd recommend a company called BRE, which is a software design firm. $1 per premise, and that would tell you your exact footages, not only up and down the streets, but that would tell you footages to get to the building, the houses. So that would be the next step.
Could
And then
I add?
Go ahead,
I
David.
just add one thought. The low income, low house values, the poorer parts of the town are pretty densely consolidated. The higher
Exactly.
value properties at the end of the long driveways are much higher income. And so I think this long driveway argument is not that relevant in terms of the situation in Westport. Thank you.
Yeah.
Only if it's adhered to. Yeah. That way. Yeah.
So that's part of the value of local control of the infrastructure, is that becomes a policy decision. So that's a decision you would have to make, which is, are you just going to take the total cost and distribute it across the 4,800 homes? Or are you going to have some kind of algorithm where people are going to pay a little more? They're going to be allocated a little more if they're more rural and they have a longer driveway. But that's policy decision. So you can decide that.
So one thing also I think it's important to know, Jeff, is when Jeff talks about a $60 cost structure, okay, it's important to understand that when we're talking about $60, we're talking about $60 gig, right? 1,000 up, 1,000 down, complete fiber optic infrastructure connectivity. So very reliable, very robust, non-shared, by the way. So your neighbor, what they do doesn't matter. But I also think it's important to point out that that is not supplemented. So every time you get, and by the way, the infrastructure component of that is about what, 35% of it, Jeff? 33%, 35?
I'd say 35. Might be 40 in their case.
Maybe
but
40, yeah, maybe in their case. But every time you get a dollar from state or federal to that directly offsets that infrastructure cost, right? So we haven't even begun to kind of calculate, we're just saying, look, if you get 50% of the people signing up for the network, you're going to be at about $60. We're not even contemplating the fact that you just got $241,000. And that's going to go a long way to help you with some of that backbone getting to those remote areas. And there'll be other opportunities like that. So anyway, go ahead.
So anyway, next steps. First one would be high level design to validate the financial numbers we give you. We're going to use industry numbers and Google Maps to come up with it, but we're going to recommend you spend another $5,000 if you want to take the next step and do a high level design. And then we can harden those numbers. From there, I think it's going to be talking about the strategies to get an idea of what the take rates are going to be. And there's a variety of things we can do. I don't know that we want to get into that tonight. We can. But I think that would be a key next step before you decide, do you want to take this in front of the select board or a town meeting?
I'd say we need to have some cost estimates so that we can talk to people about take rates. And if we don't have that, that's a key to raising that. We had the previous survey of households without any of this kind of information. But if we can now give them specific information about probable costs and certain types of service, well, I think then we can have an intelligent survey and get some meaningful responses.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
Totally agree.
we will give you cost performance based upon a specific take rate, but then we'll also give you a table that says, okay, if you vary up or down from that take rate, here's what it means to you as far as
Oh, were you starting to say something?
Yeah, I just think we need to spend the $5,000 and get as accurate of representation of what's going to need to be built and the cost.
Yeah, I think that's a
don't know-
no-brainer.
I don't know where the 5,000 comes from. I don't know if we
The
have it or
ARPA
not.
money.
So if you want us to include
I'm serious. We have several $100,000 sitting in the bank right now of ARPA money for this sort of thing.
So if you would like us to include the bill of materials that comes out of that process, to be very precise with the numbers, we're happy to do that. As part of financial modeling.
Yeah, the key thing I think for Westport, because there's the rural and the long driveways, that's the key thing that would come out of the high level design is we'd get the exact footages, and then Devin's talking, and then from there we'd correlate it with the bill of materials, so we'd know what does the conduit cost, what does the fiber cost, how many boxes do we need.
Well,
So-
I think to what you were saying earlier, I think David is exactly right. Like we have to start saying, hey, if it was going to cost you $75, would you want to switch internet? Is very different than, hey, if it's cost you $20, do you want to switch your internet, right? So in order to kind of get a realistic take rate, you're going to have some kind of costing. So if there's a piece of work that we haven't already contracted you to do, or that we haven't already contracted to be done, that's smallish in nature, I would like to know that maybe before June 30th if we have that, because I think that is going to be you're not going to be able to make any decisions without that kind of information. So if there's a small spend that we need to do, then we should consider doing it. So if you have something like that, I'm not asking you to do it right now, but like if you have something like that, you can advance that forward ahead of June 30.
Yeah. So
And
that would,
may I just make just one quick statement? If I could afford the long driveway, I wouldn't live where I live.
Sure. Understood.
But you're not going to get anything at all if we can't get enough of the town to buy in, right?
Right.
So that's
No,
so
you're
we wanna be
exactly
looking
right. Yeah, yep.
holistically. Devin, were you saying something?
so we would,
Yeah,
that work would be outsourced to a company called BRE. So if you came to us and said, we want that data, then we would subcontract to BRE. They would do it for $1 per premise. And so
My gosh.
Go ahead and can you go ahead and get a quote for that?
Yeah.
I think that's.
Yep.
I'm surprised we only have 5,000 premises, but okay.
So anyway, I think that the reason we don't do that, we don't want you to spend that money unless it's in the realm of possibility that you want to take that next step. So we like working through the process rather than just assuming right up front, but it is a logical next step if there's enough interest to say, let's get hard.
Well, by the time you get a quote and we get it to this, I mean, by the time we get that, it'll be June 30 anyway, but let's just go ahead and just get a head start on that.
Yeah, we might be able to get it tomorrow from them. We know it's going to be $1, but we'll harden that. Go ahead, Devin.
I was going to say, and you would be amazed and surprised at how quickly they can do these because they do them all in software. So, for example, we introduced this exact concept to New Bedford. New Bedford decided to carve out a section of their city, so it's essentially somewhere around 1,800-ish homes and businesses combination, and they submitted the information today. They're going to have the drawings to us by early next week, probably Monday or Tuesday. So, it doesn't take as long as you think. As soon as, the biggest lift, it's more time consuming to get them all the data they need. And then their system just crunch the data and they do an amazing job. So.
Cool.
It'll take longer for your select board to approve it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, because we have a meeting Monday, you won't get it then. It'll be at least 2 weeks before the select board can approve it. So, I mean, if it's you're not going to have a good take rate conversation without knowing what.
I think you're right. We think you're right.
The other benefit, by the way, to doing that work, and this is largely why New Bedford's doing it up front, is you need that level of detail when you apply for these grant opportunities because they expect to see a network design. They expect to see a plan and a design related to that plan. That's usually one of the boxes that they require to check off in a lot of these infrastructure grant opportunities. So that's the benefit to doing it is because you'll have it for those opportunities when you apply for those grants. So anyway.
Okay, so you're gonna look at that. You're gonna send us the materials that you reviewed. You're gonna work out if we only have meetings every other week until June 30th. What does that look like? And if we need to have some more meetings, or if we need to have a longer meeting. But I think an agenda would help make sure that we're progressing like you think we should be progressing.
Sean, if we can get you a proposal tomorrow, can you get it on the select board agenda? Or is it too late for that?
We've already posted, so
okay, very good.
40 hours, right?
I mean, yeah, no, we've already posted, so we probably can't.
That's fine.
Okay, so there was a lot of stuff we didn't talk about that was in that other stuff. So it sounds like mostly financial stuff. A lot of that consideration was before. I don't want to go too much longer with this meeting because it's late in the day, but is there anything else that we didn't talk about that we want to talk about from anybody? I know I had a question, Keith, about the fiber, the project. Do we have fiber yet?
Has not been shipped yet. We're still waiting to hear the ship date. Last time we met, they had just started the production of the fiber. So I don't know how long it takes to make all that mileage of fiber there, but it's probably 2 or 3 weeks. So I'd expect them to ship it soon.
Keith, I think I asked you this already, and I think you told me it's 144 count, but do you remember what the fiber count is?
I believe it was like there were some sections that were 144 and some was 280,
288.
Yeah. I mean, I can get the exact numbers if you want to see that.
No, that's what I wanted to hear. So thank you.
Yeah.
Too many of these have been done with 12 count fiber, so that's great.
Yep.
So I just had a question about these take rates. Is it relevant to know how many people actually just have Charter internet services in Westport in order to get an idea of people switching over? Or is that not really important to know for your take rates?
I mean, ultimately, we've got to go to people and say, there's really two approaches. One is you hire some college students that have a packet of information and they go knock every door and give the people that information. And they don't have to get a commitment, but just say, if it's this, would you sign up? And then just say, we're gathering information. We're not asking you to sign up. We're gathering information. If it's this, would you sign up? and we find out that way. The other is
Can
that
can I
you-
No,
Yeah,
Richard,
there's-
can I
Go ahead,
can I
Richard.
pose just a stupid question? If we think in terms of the major artery, and I think in terms of the major artery as Route 6, if you're able to do the same thing, what you're suggesting along Route 6 and the smaller little roads that come off of that, would that give you an adequate number to be able to deal with in your survey?
Well, I think, for this decision, I think the town wants as good a data as it can get because it's a big financial decision. So I think
Richard, let's
It-
so this was Renee had the floor here. So let's make sure Renee has his questions here.
Yeah, I just wanted to find out whether or not, I mean, part of my research, I'm trying to find out how many just internet subscribers there are, right? With
Yeah.
Charter.
Yeah.
I was able to find out on the Massachusetts website, okay, there are 4,500 cable TV subscribers, but nowhere can I find out how many internet subscribers there are.
Correct.
I talked to a couple people at Charter. They say it may be anywhere between, 6 to 8,000 just internet subsubscribers. So
I think you
That's
I think you can actually count, and I think you can actually count
Richard,
every
you
one of
don't have
those.
the-
Yeah.
Richard, I'm going to have to ask you to pause. You do not have the floor. So, so Renee is went on the Cable Advisory Committee. So Renee has the best access to this type of information. So I think that Renee is checking with Jeff if it's if there's other information here that's helpful that we can be providing.
Yeah, I don't know that we can get the number of their customers. Towns and cities that have a digital divide issue, more as an access issue, are going to the cable companies and asking for their maps, meaning where's fiber, where's cable. And that is going to be important for the next round of funding, because if you can show that there are gaps in the town where you have DSL infrastructure and not cable infrastructure, or if fiber's not close to a node, then those maps become important for that process. So a lot of cities and towns are going to the cable company under their franchise agreement, saying per the agreement, you have to provide us your maps. They have 30 days to provide it. They have to provide that information, but I don't believe they have to provide you the customer count.
Well, not only that, but they sometimes have to provide, like you were saying, Renee, the cable TV customer count, but not necessarily the internet. And that's because every franchise agreement in the country with a cable operator only applies to video service. It does not apply to internet.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, TV, cable TV. And so
Yeah,
that's why they give you those and are kind of required to give you those. I would say it's going to be very rare that a homeowner or a business has cable TV service and does not also have internet service. That's going to be very rare.
That was my point.
Yeah. So I think you can take that as a baseline number, and then you can say, there's probably a certain percentage above that just have internet as well, in addition to that. So I think that's valuable data. And if you have access to it, fantastic. Let's get it. Let's look at it at least and assess it. I think you're going down a pretty good track there.
Okay.
Thanks, Renee. Okay. Anything else David, did you have something? Did you raise your hand?
Can't hear you, David.
I was going to
There
move
you
to
go.
adjourn.
Okay.
Yeah.
My notes already say Paul Jonkis was going to second that, but he
No.
didn't.
A second. How's that?
Keith Novo beat you. All right, we have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.